The stereotype is that, teenagers don't want to spend time with their parents, which maybe that should be a different podcast. If you have that close relationship, then you have teenagers who want to spend time with you. And how do I know? Because I had a session with the teenagers who said, well, I guess now I'm a teenager that I'm supposed to be rebellious, so I'm not supposed to want to spend time with my parents. And me going, what do you want to do? I want to spend time with my parents. I really enjoy the time.
Welcome to Empowering Choices Podcast. My name is Joshua.
I'm Lucas.
And I'm Erik.
Erik and Lucas are licensed professional counselors, and the title of today's episode is Hug Your Teenager.
I was trying to figure out how you could deliver a hug over the internet. And I was having a conversation with one of my clients the other day, and he was talking about the haptic feedback technology.
Yeah, yes.
And we were talking about it in an entirely different context of if people make stupid comments on the internet, they should be able to be punched in the face. And he was like, oh, haptic feedback, you could do that. And I'm wondering if you could set up you could send a virtual hug. You could create a vest.
You could do that.
That simulates a hug. I don't know.
Squeeze, maybe it's got hooked up to an air compressor and it goes kind of like a blood pressure.
It's like a blood pressure cuff for your torso.
Just a big squeeze.
Coming up with an interesting device that could be at some point used for evil and just squeeze someone to death over the internet. Okay, all right.
Squeeze someone to death over the internet.
But hey, here's your hug.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Which is exactly how a teenager may feel, or what we think a teenager may feel if they're getting hugged.
Well, that was our semi-evocative title.
Right.
So we are continuing on this, I guess, is number 9 out of the 11 things Erik made into a list off of the internet from parents. That's the official subtitle of the but regrets parents had. And this was, they did not hug their children enough. So we thought we would talk about hugs and Erik, what stuck out to you about this one? Kick us off with something before we get too derailed about blood pressure squeezing devices.
Yeah, you mean like we already did?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's too late for that.
I said more
derailed.
More.
Well, I found it interesting that people were talking about that a regret is that they didn't show enough affection to their kids. They didn't feel that they had, really kind of hugged them enough or given them the affectionate touch in the ways that they saw it later on that they should have.
I'm just glancing through just kind of the notes of all of these regrets, and it looks like the theme of the ones that you found was these parents, if we kind of took them as a conglomerate, which I think you found it from more than one location.
Yeah. I did.
But the theme kind of seems to be disconnected or what's the parenting style? Avoidant, not connected. I don't remember what it's called.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah.
Authoritative and whatever the
authoritarian.
Absent. But yeah, these parents the theme seems to be not connected enough. And if generically all of these regrets could be, quote, solved by being more connected to your child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the affection is one of those. I think probably one of the reasons that these parents regretted it is that they may have had children later on that were noticing, hey, I'm not really huggy, touchy to my kids. And when I think about where that came from, well, my parents weren't huggy, touchy, and so it's a definite piece that when you're growing up, that it can have some residue that will then last as to how you're going to interact and, show affection to your kids.
So one of your notes you have here is the comment that there may be a belief that hugging a child too much could make them less independent. And I'm not sure if that's a current parental concern. That seems like it's probably a previous generation more of a problem. But
I think
the parents
I think it goes along with some of the old beliefs that if boys talk about their feelings, that they'll become homosexual. And
that accelerated quickly.
And it kind of goes hand in hand because I've had that happen. I mean, even in today's world where it's like, hey, we're gonna work on the feelings of the child, and a parent will say, I don't want you to make him gay.
Oh my God!
And it's like. How did you
show me that study, please?
Yeah, and that's the same thing. It's parents who hug their.
I don't even know if I would respond to that. I'm going to make my child.
Well, it's
You're
like,
taking them to the wrong institution. We talk about feelings in here all the time.
right. And it's like you said, there's no research that backs that. Just like there's no research that backs if you hug your kids too much, you will, stop them from being independent.
Is that from the same research study that says vaccines cause autism?
It probably is closely linked. But no, if you are, if your kid gets 5 feet away and you pull them back and you give them a hug, and then they get 5 feet away and you pull them back and you give them a hug, and you just keep all day long giving them a hug, they're like that, like pulling them back, then they're never going to be independent. That's true.
Sure.
But that's not based on giving them too many hugs. That's based on the insecurity of the parent not wanting them to be more than 5 feet away. And so if, that's just kind of a silly example, but you can have parents that don't want their kids out of their sight. They don't want their kids doing things. They don't directly know exactly what's happening. That's the same type of a thing. That will stifle independence, because independence has to be independent.
Right.
And they have to be able to explore. And, there's a really great middle to where a parent does provide supervision, but allows their children to be able to explore the world that they're in. You might not do it the same way in the forest or the jungle that you would do in your living room, but that's understandable.
I was having the conversation with my wife just yesterday, and this is related to like child independence, right? My girls were having a fun time running around in the front yard, and then we were going to go inside and like make dinner and stuff. And it's like, I don't really trust our kids. Not that I don't trust my kids. I don't trust the rest of the world to let them play unsupervised in the front yard that we have that has no fence in the neighborhood that we live in. And so I told the kids, I'm like, you can come inside or you can play in the backyard, which does have a fence. And it's just like, that sucks. Because like they were just having fun running around in the front yard, and they were fine. They would have been fine if the rest of the world wasn't the way it was.
Yeah, it's not the same as it used to be. In a lot of different aspects. We played in the front yard at 3 and 4 and
that's the age of my kid,
5 and 6, and by 6 we're throughout the neighborhood. So there's a lot of differences.
I've got too many cop cars that roll through my neighborhood with reason to be there.
No, I totally hear you.
Yeah. But that's a bit of a divergence from hugs. But
so. Does this would just be a guess, and maybe this is totally off. Is this a thing that men would have more trouble with predominantly over females? Because I think about like a lot of babies, obviously, like people don't start not hugging or holding a baby because you kind of have to. But I see some where the mother and the father are kind of equally sharing that. But then I see other guys that are like, I'm going to leave that to mom. And then like, is that where it starts? Or tell me how on or off I am there.
There's no studies that show that guys are worse at affection than women. There's training that happens in the family as to whether or not that gets set up for that individual. So more than likely, the guys who are like, "Oh, okay, that's enough touch for now," probably are probably doing slightly better than their fathers were doing, who raised them. But it's generally coming out of belief systems and customs over genetic, because there is no genetic studies. I mean, men can be emotional, men can be affectionate, men can be huggy, touchy, feely. I mean, it's all there. The studies have shown that women have more emotions, not a greater span, but that are more emotional, not in a bad way. They're just more in touch with emotions, generally speaking, overall. But you have women who are just as that's enough touch. You have the same thing. You just have a slightly difference on the gender as to which one overall has a little more emotion showing through than the other one.
So basically, I just assume that the touch, the hugging, the physical closeness probably does some kind of chemically brain thing. I think about like playing The Sims and like when, good things happen, little bubbles appeared above of hearts or affection or whatever. It's creating that.
Remember the podcast that we talked about horseplay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what the studies were coming out and showing is that horseplay for boys they're realizing how important it is because the boy is studying his father's face, and there's a lot of chemical things going on there to help them understand, what facial expressions mean, what is okay, what is too much pressure, what is not enough pressure, and there's a lot of learning that's going in there with the boy.
Yeah. So do most, I would assume, do most kids, are they just open to affection and hugging, and then it's the parents that kind of diverge, or are there some kids who are all of a sudden difficult to hug?
Well, so there's several different things going on right there. Are there certain temperaments that might not be as touchy-feely as other temperaments? Sure. Can that be enhanced by the way you were raised? Double sure. Yeah. Is there certain time periods where a human being begins to pull away from touch? Generally speaking, as the child is going into adolescence, maybe starting a little bit in junior high, they're gaining some independence. So walking through the store, holding your hand the way they did when you were 8 is not necessarily what they're going to want to do through the mall with you at 15.
Not necessarily because they hate you, but because they're trying to figure out what becoming an independent adult is about.
Kind of. I mean, it's not that they hate you at all.
No, yeah, absolutely.
It's just that they're pulling away, finding themselves.
Yep. And they got to look cool. Kind of the whole thing, like mom, dad walk 10 steps behind.
Now you've got a cultural aspect that's hitting them at that time there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they do still want your touch. They do still want your affection. They do still want hugs. They may want to change when, where, how. They may want to influence how that is received by them. You know, all of these things are very important components to their own self-empowerment.
Got it. Yeah, my almost 2-year-old, he is hugging and kissing everything right now.
Mm-hmm. Everything, like, not even everyone.
No, like literally Mario. Like we just got a Hot Wheels Mario Kart. We're hugging it. We're kissing it. We're hugging. We're kissing Legos. We're hugging. We're kissing trains. So he's just.
Yep. One of my favorites was my daughter. We were we were just walking along the sidewalk, and there were like these posts of a fence.
Oh yeah.
And she would go to hug each post as we were walking along the sidewalk.
Some well-loved posts there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are both great examples of how a human child is taking a concept and then trying to spread that out in different areas of the world.
Where does this apply?
Right. And so eventually they're going to get to the places where they understand that the post and the Mario don't understand the reception of that kind of love and hug, and that a human being will receive that in the way that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Right now they're just practicing, and so the base temperament is a big dictator of how much touchy-feely that is happening, and then the parenting helps to guide it in the right ways as it's moving towards society.
And there is, of course, the folks who have like autism and their interactions with touch, which are,
very different,
outside average, but that's, not their wheelhouse traditionally.
Well, they have a very different neurology, like being left-handed. And so it can cause physical pain for them to receive touch. That's a difference. That's a huge difference.
Yep.
And like in the notes we talked about earlier, being forced to give hugs to, grandma or Uncle Louie.
That's a huge conversation amongst other parents that I have, is the whole, hey, we want our kids. And I think a lot of it, because they say, well, I was always forced to hug my creepy whatever. And then they're afraid that that's going to open up the kid to thinking, oh, anyone who wants to hug you or touch you can. What do you do about that?
Well, and so I understand what they're saying, and there is some truth to what you're doing with your child. Is you're saying you don't get a choice. So if somebody wants to hug you because they're an adult, they just get to. That's a really bad message to send to your child. Most children will be able to kind of change that and rewrite that for themselves when they're in high school to early adulthood. But why put them through that? Why not give them that empowerment that they can be able to choose, how that's happening with their body. Now, I can hear people saying, oh, grandma's not going to go with that. Okay. That's my responsibility as a parent, is to talk to my mom or my dad or my wife to her mom or her dad and to make it clear, yeah, it is going to be their choice. It's not personal, and we're trying to help them be able to give and receive hugs, at their self-empowerment and at their choice.
So my 2-year-old is less hug-y than my older one has been. And so we've been asking her, like she'll be going to bed, like, you want a night-night hug? And sometimes she'll say, no. It's like, okay, do you want a night-night high five? Right. So kind of like a step away.
You changed it.
And I think the first time we offered that, she's like, yeah. And then sometimes she'll say no to that.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, how about just a wave? And I will usually with her, and she'll be like, no. I'm like, at least wave, kid. Like, like I'm not like that's not like a. Like, am I forcing you? Well, yeah, kind of. But at least say something, right?
Good night.
Those are the kind of like things that we do with her. It's like, do you want a hug? Do you want a high five? Do you want a wave?
And a lot of that comes out of adults who have said, yeah, I always got forced and didn't like it.
Yeah.
I mean, the forcing of the hug does not make it more desirable for the child. There was a reason they didn't want to hug certain people at certain times. Maybe there was something about them and the relationship they didn't really like. Right. Maybe there was something kind of like with your daughter at that time. They're just like, no, I'm not feeling it.
Well, she's 2, so no is her favorite word.
Right.
I mean,
but you want them to be able to stand up for themselves and be assertive, because I guarantee you they're going to run into boys in their teenage and junior high years who are going to be looking for, oh, you just have to give hugs, huh? You can't say no, huh? Okay. And they're going to take advantage of that, and that can roll into adulthood. I've worked with adults who are like, yeah, I can't say no. And I think it comes back to people made me always do certain things. And now it's so hard for me to be able to resist that.
I'm going to suspect that the parents here who are expressing a regret about not hugging their children enough wasn't because their children were saying no.
Yeah, I'm going to assume the same thing.
Yeah, because if it's like, well, I would prefer to hug my child more, but they're saying no, I think it's kind of a different dynamic. That
love and affection will take natural routes. If you're building that relationship and you're building that closeness, then that is an expression of that closeness. I knew a girl one time that her way of saying goodnight was to come up to her mom, whom she loved more than anybody, and she would just say, "Good night, Mom." And that was, to get a hug from her, and she had Asperger's.
I was just going to say, I think that
was a huge feat. And when it happened, it meant a lot. But they allowed her to be able to have that freedom to be able to express that touch the way and receive that touch the way that she deemed is best for herself.
And I don't know if we explicitly mentioned it in this podcast, but like this comes down to one of the fundamental things we talk about all the time, which is know your kid.
Know your kid.
Right? It's like, so how many hugs should you give your kid? Well, it depends on your kid. That's an enormous fundamental. But like, I think the thing we would encourage parents to do would be like, do intend to hug your kid. Make that something that you like strive towards, because it's probably good for them. And I would guess the average kid probably wants lots of those. Even the average teenager, even though they would, vomit before saying so.
Okay.
And there you go.
I'm not really saying that most teenagers would vomit before saying so. No,
that's
we're
just being though.
Yeah. Well, the stereotype is that, teenagers don't want to spend time with their parents, which maybe that should be a different podcast. If you have that close relationship, then you have teenagers who want to spend time with you. And how do I know? Because I had a session with the teenagers who said, well, I guess now I'm a teenager that I'm supposed to be rebellious, so I'm not supposed to want to spend time with my parents. And me going, what do you want to do? I want to spend time with my parents. I really enjoy the time. Then I have the parent right after that going, well, now they're a teenager and I'm not supposed to like spending time with them. And I'm like, I'm seeing a theme here. Yeah. And I'm like, well, but do you want to spend time with them? And they're like, I love my kids. I love spending time with them. I think you guys should have a conversation because
you're both saying the same thing, but not to each other.
And the thing is, culture is dictating, or what you're assuming is culture.
Right.
It's not culture. It's psychology taking from that kids are at teenage age are becoming more independent, so they're pushing away from you, maybe rebelling a little bit against certain things, which is it really rebelling, or is it them choosing a different way? That's a whole different debate right there as well. But it's being made into kids have to rebel and parents have to expect it, and kids don't want to be with parents, and parents shouldn't want to be with kids, and none of that is right or true.
Yeah. So a preview for a future podcast.
There you go.
Exactly. Well,
got two of them.
If you enjoyed that, we got a lot more podcasts and things you can check out here on our channel. It'd mean the world to us if you would leave a comment or give us a thumbs up or a like. And then definitely go and download our app in the App Store. Just search Empowering Choices Parenting. You can create a free account. You can take some of the Parenting Fundamentals courses and then get a Plus membership from there. And there's lots to explore. So we will see you on the next episode.
We'll have to figure out how you can send us a virtual hug later. We'll get back to you on that.
Yes.